Earlier today, President Biden and Bernie Sanders gave public remarks and congratulated each other on their joint success in pressuring Big Pharma to lower drug prices, as well as to illustrate to the Democratic Party the important gains when moderate Democrats and progressive Democrats unite in the face of Republican obstruction. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. Greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, so this is good. This is positive stuff when we see tentpole leaders of the Democratic Party. Obviously, the president first and foremost, but Bernie Sanders, who is the foremost progressive politician in the United States in terms of name recognition and influence. And I've said it before in multiple videos, and I'll say it again. Bernie Sanders has had an enormously positive impact on President Biden's agenda and successes. You know, when Biden became the Democratic nominee, he made, I would say, a different decision than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. He made a much more aggressive effort to court Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders supporters. He brought Bernie into the campaign. Bernie became one of his foremost advisors and had an enormous impact on how the president has governed and is at least somewhat responsible for some of the best accomplishments of the Biden administration. I think it's the influence of progressives like Bernie, like AOC, and the Progressive Caucus in general in both chambers, pushing Biden further to the left, not nearly as far as his right-wing critics say, but pushing Biden more to the left than Biden would probably want to naturally govern himself. And I think that's been for the best. They have had enormous influence on the president. And the context for this is that AstraZeneca, which is one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, also announced, in addition to like two other major pharmaceutical companies, that they would cap their inhaler products at $35 per month. AstraZeneca will cap out-of-pocket expenses at $35 for all its inhaler products. The company announced Monday, and this was a couple of weeks ago, the cap is effective June 1st and will apply to the company's entire range of inhaler products. The announcement follows a similar move by rival company Boehringer Ingelheim and comes amid scrutiny from Democratic lawmakers over the cost of inhalers. So in the context of all this, Biden and Bernie made some public remarks. I just want to give you some context from the CNN article before we play the clips themselves. So President Biden teamed up Wednesday with Bernie Sanders, his one-time 2020 Democratic primary rival and a leader in Congress's progressive wing, to promote efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs, including inhalers, at a White House event on Wednesday. Now, I'll also remind you that the key piece of legislation with respect to lowering drug costs is the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. Okay, so keep that in your back pocket. The event gave Biden an opportunity to flex his progressive bona fides while also making the case to Americans that his administration has taken steps to lower healthcare costs. Biden on Wednesday credited Sanders with laying the groundwork for his administration's healthcare policies. The independent senator's focus on Medicare for all was a major focal point, as you well know. And Sanders has long decried the high prices Americans pay for drugs, grilling pharmaceutical company executives and releasing a multitude of bills to bring down medication costs. He even led a caravan to Canada in 2019 to give people with diabetes access to less expensive insulin. Biden sought to align himself with the outspoken senator, saying Wednesday that the two have fought against high drug prices for the first time in 20 years. I'm proud of my administration taking on Big Pharma in the most significant ways ever, and it wouldn't have been done without Bernie. Bernie was the one who was leading the way for decades, which is why we're here today. Again, effuse praise coming from the president, which I think is really smart. So now let's get to some of the clips, two from Biden and one from Bernie.
The big reason why we're lying awake at night with these questions is because the drug companies are charging exorbitant prescription drug prices, higher prices than anywhere in the world. And Bernie said it. I was listening in the back. Bernie, you and I have been fighting this for 25 years. Finally, we beat Big Pharma. Finally.
And to be clear, what he means mostly, in addition to, again, kind of bullying AstraZeneca and the others to lowering the out-of-pocket expenses for their inhaler products, is the Inflation Reduction Act carries a very crucial provision which allows Medicare and Medicaid, these government programs, for the first time in U.S. history, to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, right? And again, so it is a defeat of Big Pharma in the sense that it finally forced them to a position where they can negotiate the lowering of prices. I think it was several months ago, the first 10 drugs were announced that were eligible for price negotiation. There will be another schedule with another 10. And the prices themselves won't go into effect until 2026. Let's be very clear about that. But it's set in stone, it's codified into the legislation. So seniors will eventually feel those effects, and it will be because of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders leading the way. I should also emphasize that this is just the beginning of the story. There needs to be so much more for that. As a matter of fact, I believe the IRA had a provision, if I'm not mistaken, that would have capped out-of-pocket expenses for insulin for everybody. And it was tanked by obviously all Republicans who voted against it, and also by I think Joe Manchin as well, if I'm not mistaken. But I digress. Anyway, a meaningful victory to be sure, but as Bernie Sanders often emphasizes, there's more work to be done, and that probably would require electing a Democrat in the White House, keeping a Democratic-controlled Senate, perhaps even expanding the majority, if at all possible, with more progressive senators than Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and also taking back the House. But I want to play this clip from Bernie Sanders in which he kind of recaps some of this and also takes the time to thank the president.
In my view, we can no longer tolerate companies like Novo Nordisk charging the American people $1,000 a month for Ozempic, a drug that costs less than $5 to manufacture, when that same exact product is sold in Germany for $59. $1,000 in America, $59 in Germany, unacceptable. We can no longer tolerate Astellas and Pfizer charging Americans with prostate cancer over $165,000 for Xtandi, when the exact same product can be purchased for just $20,000 in Japan. Even more disturbing is the reality that over half of the new drugs coming onto the market today cost $300,000, and a number of them actually cost over $1 million. This is an issue that we must get a handle on. Working together, we can take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs in America. And when we do that, we will be lowering the cost of health care in our country, which is double the cost of any other major nation on earth. I want to thank President Biden for what he has done on this issue up to now, and I look forward to working with the president as we go forward.
Again, just great that these two are congratulating each other and demonstrating the strength of the alliance. I want to play one more clip and then we'll kind of sum it all up. But it's also important to contextualize that, again, Biden represents an establishment moderate Democrat, right? That's his instinct, to be more towards the center. Bernie is obviously a progressive. Bernie has pushed Biden meaningfully to the left on important issues and has made Biden's administration better for it. And this is all in the face of consistent Republican opposition, even on the most, I would say, basic, the most easily digestible of issues where you would think there would be Republican support, as President Biden points out here.
And finally, with Bernie's help, I finally got my Inflation Reduction Act, which passed. Bernie helped get it passed. Not one Republican in the entire Congress, this did surprise me, I have to admit to you. Not one single Republican voted for it, not one single one, to give us authority to take on and beat Big Pharma. Take insulin for people with diabetes. It costs $10 to make. If you add everything in terms of packaging and all the rest, you can argue maybe $12 total. And they're charged as much as $400 a month. Not anymore. Not anymore. Seniors with diabetes will only have to pay $35 a month from this point on.
And again, that was opposed by every single Republican because they didn't want Joe Biden to get a political victory and they didn't want their names associated with a Biden/Democratic victory. So absolutely despicable. By the way, they'll try to take credit for it, and they should never be allowed to take credit for it. Anytime they do, they should be relentlessly mocked by Democrats, by moderates, by progressives, by everybody who's not a Trump cultist in one loud voice. They should be community noted to hell and back. No credit, none whatsoever. And we also have to proclaim this from the rooftops. Last thing I'll say is I did a video a couple of weeks ago, and one of them involved President Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, who I loved. That guy had probably the second hardest job in Washington as the chief of staff, the second most powerful job in Washington, and he did it incredibly well. And one of the things that he has repeatedly said from the beginning is that, contrary to what some may say, the progressives in Congress were a meaningful contribution to Joe Biden's victories. As a matter of fact, he went so far as to say that very often progressives had Biden's back much more than moderates like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Ron Klain said it. Ron Klain would know because he was the closest advisor to the president, and he was the proxy. He had a great relationship with the Progressive Caucus in the House and the Senate. So when Ron Klain says that more often than not, progressives had Biden's back and were less of a thorn in his side than moderates and centrists like Manchin and Sinema, that's something that all of us should take to heart, because I think too often, especially the more moderate or quote unquote liberal Democrats, undersell the importance of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the coalition, or the faction that they represent in our coalition. We can't do it without them, and I don't think we should take them for granted. And so I love this press conference. I love that Biden and Bernie publicly congratulated each other, and they both recognize that there's more work to be done. Let me know what you think in the comments.